Okay. Just open the door, so
Okay.
give it a couple minutes. All right, Larry.
Welcome to another Sports Business Classroom webinar, everyone. My name is Larry Kuhn. I'm the General Manager of Sports Business Classroom and the instructor for Cba Mastery with Larry Kuhn. This webinar is brought to you by Sports Business Classroom and Cba Mastery. I also have with me, as last time, Eric Pincus. Eric is a Sports Business Classroom instructor. You've also seen him on Bleacher Report, NBA TV, Basketball Insiders. He also has his own Twitter, YouTube streams that he's disseminating CBA knowledge on. How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing quite well. I'm a little overwhelmed by the activity of the last 48 hours or so.
No kidding. And with us also, as last time, Ryan McDonough. He's the former GM of the Phoenix Suns. Now, when radio.com was looking for somebody to be on the show, they had to have their own Scalabrine jersey. And fortunately, they found the right guy in Ryan McDonough. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Larry. Actually, an update. I got rid of the Scalabrine jersey, and this is a long story, but it's actually Charles Barkley's signed Bill Russell jersey. But that's a longer story, better told over drinks. So we swapped out Scalabrine, and we got a Bill Russell jersey that Charles Barkley owns sitting behind me.
We can abandon the topic and just get the scotch.
Mm-hmm. That's a late night version, Larry. Late night show.
All right. Also new with us for this one, he is the head of the Scouting Video Analytics program at Sports Business Classroom. You've also seen him on The Athletic, where he hosts every one of their podcasts. Dave DuFour. What's up, Dave?
Not a whole lot. I am just, here in my office. I'm not in Charles Barkley's attic like Ryan is. Yeah, I'm going to steal a jersey from Larry's house next time I'm in town.
Good luck finding one of those. So we're going to see the ferocious Calida Taylor a little bit later in the show. So the first thing I want to talk about, I'm really excited about CBA Mastery with Larry Kuhn. It is an on-demand course for learning the collective bargaining agreement. So it's my curriculum. It is what I have been teaching for years. I've taught it to teams. I teach it to prospective agents. I teach it at Sports Business Classroom Live, and now it's available on demand. You can take it at your own pace. You get exercises. You get all sorts of great stuff with that. We're going to give you a special offer today toward the end of the show. So hold that thought. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but you can also find details at sportsbusinessclassroom.com. So here's what we're going to do today. Now that we have free agency open. So, last time we had this webinar, we just got an agreement. So we were talking about the numbers and we were talking about the basic prospects of having a season. Well, now we've had the draft, free agency is open, the trade moratorium is open. So a lot of stuff has happened in the last few weeks. As Eric said, it's been tough keeping up with stuff. So we're going to go through a few things. We're going to look at a couple of things that are of interest to us from a CBA perspective or a roster building management strategic planning type of perspective. Well, and if we get to some teachable moments, I might break off and do a little bit of lecturing. This is a webinar, so we might as well use it as a teaching opportunity. So since our last webinar, everything went crazy. Now, it wasn't quite 2019 everything happened in 6 hours crazy, but due to COVID and due to the schedule, it was its own special kind of crazy. I mean, how do you guys sum up all of this?
Insane. I mean, it's just another word for crazy. It's funny because I've had this conversation with a bunch of people that I work with. We have all been begging for a more condensed offseason for some reason, where we want the draft and we want free agency. We just want it all. Let's go back to back. No, I'm not asking for that anymore. Give me more time.
Well, what I liked about it was that we now very quickly know what the next season is going to be like. It condensed it. It made it certainly exciting and wild and crazy. I'm trying to understand like who is on the Pelicans, who is on the Pistons, who do the Thunder have? I don't know. They made so many moves,
only
players
draft
in and
picks.
out. It's
The
just
Thunder
so hard to track.
Sam Presti is doing his best to just start 5 trade exceptions.
I think he's playing 8th graders. Actually, if you go into the CBA, there's a little loophole there.
Hey,
where you
my
can
daughter's
play the
available.
future
She
draft
plays.
picks.
And then to answer your question about Detroit, Eric, it's just centers. They have 15 centers,
Yes.
and I don't know who's going to bring the ball up, but they're going to overpower teams in the post. If I could real quick, Larry, from a 15-plus year front office perspective, 10-plus in Boston, 5-plus in Phoenix, I can't imagine. I mean, Dave and Eric and you, Larry, cover the league as closely as anybody and keep up with the transactional game, but trying to keep track of all that in real time when you're with a team and you have an owner and players and your coaching staff and front office staff wondering what's going on, who is where. It just has to be exhausting. I remember, every year after the draft, whether I was in Boston or Phoenix, you just want to take a couple days, decompress, catch your breath. And to the extent that the draft ended late Wednesday night, free agency started Friday evening. So I just can't imagine the turnaround from a front office perspective, having less than 48 hours before the 2 biggest events on an NBA front office calendar.
I was exhausted Friday night. Literally, I started working so early on Friday morning with my day job. By the time I got to like 7 o'clock Friday, but after that, and after trying to keep up with free agency, I just zonked out unconscious. And then I get a team guy calling me at 9 p.m. going, "What are the Pistons doing?" I'm like, well, what? And I barely was even coherent. And I hadn't followed that part of it, so I didn't have an answer. But I didn't admit to him that he woke me up. So it's okay. So we're looking at 72 game season. We are looking at camps opening on December 1st. So we are right around the corner from training camp, my friends. Each team is going to play up to 3 exhibition games, and the real games start on December 22nd.
Yeah, it's going to be wild, Larry. We only are going to get half the schedule. It's going to come out soon. Teams in conference are only going to play 3 times in conference. They're going to play the usual 2 that they would at a conference. But we are only going to get the first half of the schedule, and I'm really fascinated to see what this is going to be like and who is playing for which team. I still don't know.
I think that this short turnaround, we're going to really see the effect of rest, and not just rest like not playing back-to-backs, but long-term rest. We're going to see the difference between rust and rest. There are teams that haven't played since March. Right. And I think that there's going to be a bunch of Goldilocks teams that were in the bubble and either didn't make the playoffs or were gone in the first round. And those are going to be the sharpest and most fresh teams I'm expecting. So Dallas, Portland, Phoenix, I expect them to come out of the gate pretty hot.
It's like a bell curve, right? If you're on this tail of the bell curve, you played into the finals. You're the Lakers, you're the Heat, and it's too short of a break. On the other hand, if you're like Golden State, it's too long of a break. There's a Goldilocks zone right in the middle, like you were saying. How many games do you think LeBron plays, assuming he's healthy?
I think he's going to play 65 to 70 because it's LeBron. Like, he's already figured out how to load manage and play 40 minutes a night. His 40 minutes is not the same as everyone else's.
Well, he played a career low last year. I think they'll manage his minutes down. I think you're right that he'll play close to it, but it'll be a lower level minute. And then they have a better team, arguably, as far as scoring. Regular season team, I think it's undeniable they have a better regular season team. We'll debate whether they have a better playoff team. I think they'll be able to get, if they blow teams out, we could see some 25-minute games. I think they'll pace him. He might take 1 or 2 games off. He did rest the groin injury. He was always listed kind of with a sore groin. They may stick with that and rest him on a back-to-back or something like that.
Yeah. Schroeder and Trez Harrell were great pickups for managing the minutes of Anthony Davis and LeBron through the season. I mean, those guys can go out. They're going to have games where they both put up 20. And those are the nights where LeBron gets to really coast and just put up a 15-point triple-double instead of a 25-point triple-double.
All right, and we're actually going to talk about the Lakers a little bit later. But first, let's kind of transition into the meat of this program. I want to start talking about different things that happened so far. And the first thing I want to talk about is one of the first things that happened. In fact, it even started to happen even before free agency actually officially legally opened, and that was you know who, Bogdan Bogdanović. So 2 days before free agency opens, the word got out that he's going to be signed and traded to Milwaukee. Okay, wait a minute. Sign and trade requires 3 parties to agree, 2 teams and a player. Only nobody's allowed to be talking to free agents, even your own free agents, before free agency officially opens. And sure, okay, there could be some little, understandings, maybe even some back channel communication. But when word leaks out to the public, that's not such a great thing. So it's made it clear that somebody broke the rules, and the league is trying to crack down on this. They really hit the teams hard this past year, really increased the fines for doing things that weren't on the up and up. And this year they sent out a memo to all the agents, to all the players, saying, don't do that because we're going to come down on you for that. But clearly right away that actually happens. So the deal fell apart. Now, who knows how true it was, because it didn't happen, how solid it was, if anybody had actually agreed to it, but it certainly ended up not happening. Ersan Ilyasova ended up being waived, and he was one of the main pieces coming back. So he certainly, wished it would have happened. And then Bogdanović went on to sign an offer sheet with the Atlanta Hawks, and the Kings, in fact, have until midnight Eastern time tonight to decide whether or not to match that offer sheet. I want to talk about what you think they're going to do in a minute, but first, this does bring up the first of what I'm calling teachable moments. Let's see how fast Max is on the graphics on this one. There he is. So my first teachable moment, I want to talk about some of these terms, circumvention and tampering. Because you hear about both of them, but they mean 2 different things. The circumvention is the big one. In fact, everything can be considered to be a specific application of circumvention. Circumvention is doing anything that's intended to get around the intent of the CBA. So the CBA is effectively a document saying what teams, not what they're not allowed to do, what they are allowed to do. And it's like deny by default. If it's not in the CBA, it's not allowed. And trying to do something that's not allowed is circumvention, circumventing the intent of the agreement between the 2 parties being the league and the Players Association. And it doesn't even have to be an overt thing. There's what's called a general prohibition against circumvention, where the league just says, if it even smells funny, we can nix something on that basis alone. Then there's tampering. And tampering essentially boils down to, you can't talk about or to people on other teams. So it doesn't just apply to players, it applies to front office people, anything. If you start talking about people on other teams, then that's tampering, especially if you're entering into any kind of negotiations with them. Now, teams can ask for permission to talk, but then you get into, you can't talk to them before free agency opens. So we're right back in that same boat. But so tampering effectively is you're talking to or about somebody on some other team. Officially, the league says the only allowable comment you can make about a player on another team is no comment. So that's the difference. Now, if in this situation, Milwaukee had actually talked to him, to Bogdanović, that would have been both circumvention and tampering. Now, if it was the Kings who had just sort of done this deal, technically that by itself would be just circumvention. You can't talk to any free agents, including your own guys, before the opening of free agency. So let's go back to us. And so what do you think? Do we think the Kings are going to match this deal?
I'll say they should. I just think that the Kings should. It's not a terrible contract. It's like 18 million flat. over 4 years. It has a trade kicker. So what? It's not a crazy number. And he has a player option in the last year. So what? You're going to get 3 good years out of him. If I'm the Kings, I match. That to me, it's yes, match, period, done.
Well, it's like you said, it's the contract is completely in line with the level of player that he is. He's a wing who can actually play make for you. It's not like this is a guy that is very easy to find on the open market. Obviously, he has demand from teams that are looking to compete. I don't see what the harm is in matching him, bring him back, and then you find a deal when you're able to move him if you don't want to keep him. I think a lot of this was predicated with the Buddy Hield stuff. Like they had decided to keep Buddy Hield and move on from Bogdanovich. At least that's how it felt. And now, all right, so now you've got both. That's a better position to be in than to just lose him for nothing.
Yeah, one of the complicating factors here, guys, is they drafted a player who I really liked, Tyrese Halliburton, in the draft with the 12th pick. I had Halliburton as a mid-lottery grade. I didn't think he'd be there at 12. So now to the extent they just gave De'Aaron Fox a max contract, Dave and Eric mentioned they have Buddy Hield already. If they match on Bogdanovich, they have Halliburton. Those are 4 talented guards who all have relatively high expectations. Obviously, the easiest thing to do in the short term would be not to play Halliburton a whole lot. But when you draft a guy in the lottery, you don't want to do that, especially a team like the Kings that needs to develop and build something sustainable. So that is the challenge. One final point, Larry, if I could, amongst about circumvention or tampering. If you're going to do it, which I wouldn't recommend as a 15-plus year executive, but if you're going to do it, don't let anybody know about it, folks, because I woke up early on Tuesday morning, and you can check my Twitter at McDNBA 5:39. I should probably get more sleep. 5:39 a.m. I said, I'm a big Bogdanovich fan. We drafted him with the Suns. Basically, how was the league going to let this happen? Free agency doesn't start until Friday. That's the period to talk to free agents happened this past Friday. As Eric and Dave and Larry know, the date to sign, you couldn't actually sign guys until Sunday. So how late Monday night or early Tuesday morning, however you want to define it, this deal was reported with the pieces involved, and it's going to be a sign and trade, which is the only way for it to happen with Milwaukee being an over the cap team and players coming back. That's not allowed. So I wasn't the only one. I think all 3 of these guys, I'm sure, had the same reaction. More importantly, the 28 other teams beside Milwaukee and Sacramento had the same reaction, as did the league office. And I think that's where the deal really started to lose traction, which is what Larry referred to earlier. So again, if you're going to tamper, circumvent, which I'm not recommending, do not let anybody know about it, because if you do, it falls apart quickly, like this deal did.
You can even guess the likely teams that complain to the league about this one. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And you know why. Because they're trying to shake confidence, the Giannis's confidence in the front office of Milwaukee to be able to get stuff done. I think the real market inefficiency here, it's not small markets and big markets. It's that small markets don't get executives that are good at tampering, because those guys go to the big teams.
Yeah, I don't know.
Listen, hey, I don't know that Rob Pelinka tampers. I just assume that everyone does. Well, Pelinka seems to be really good at it, and the Lakers now are probably going to have a back-to-back championship opportunity because
Magic Johnson was bad at it.
Well,
exactly. And what happens as soon as Magic leaves? Well, they win a title.
Magic was bad at it because he did it. Magic did it on Jimmy Kimmel. Okay, he did it on TV, national TV.
If you're gonna do it with style.
Okay, I mean, so right. Rob was officially punished, and Magic were both punished, but Rob was punished for tampering. But they learned their lesson, etc. They don't do it anymore. Whatever. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. Here's the problem. Like, people say to me, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, all teams do it. Why are the Bucks and why are the Kings being singled out here in this particular situation? But it for the complexity of a deal that has to be worked out between 2 organizations, where you have to have a number for Bogdanovich, it's not possible to have that without some tampering and or circumvention, more circumvention. And so it's not like, oh, we think, or this person is leaning towards. It's kind of similar to if you're watching Adrian Wojnarowski tweet the draft picks right before they happen. He works for ESPN. ESPN is broadcasting the show. I'm guessing he's been told not to tell who is going to go where before it happens. So instead of saying this player is going here, he says they're focused on that player. The league is fine when you're using that kind of language. When you're saying this is happening and there's that sort of implicit agreement where you obviously a trade, come on. So this was bad. you can't let this stuff leak. I don't know who leaked it. I don't know what happened and how this came to be. We can definitely speculate. And I see the gears turning in Dave's head right now on my screen. It's like I can see exactly what he's thinking, and he's probably right. Not only that, I'll venture to say he's not probably right. He is right. And I don't even know what he's thinking, but I'm telling you he's right. However, here we are. It didn't work out. I don't think this is why the Bucks lose Giannis. If you're a Bucks fan, I don't think if he stays, he stays. If he goes, he goes. And if there are forces trying to get Giannis, of course there are forces trying to get Giannis out of Milwaukee. But some people say he's very loyal. This is, to me, the biggest thing of this offseason hasn't happened yet. We're still waiting for it. And that's Giannis deciding to take the Supermax or not. And we're just sitting here forgetting that this is the giant elephant. Like, it's going to happen or it's not going to happen.
What about Anthony Davis, though? I mean, listen, he hasn't signed yet until the name is on the dotted line. He can still go to Denver. I think it'd be great for him.
Well, they don't have the cap room, but
I know, but yeah, you can make cap.
No, it's a different situation for a lot of reasons, but his is more about the timing of when. But what's different with Giannis is that the money that he can take with Milwaukee cannot be replicated anywhere else because it is a Supermax. And so if he's turning down a Supermax, that's a lot for Milwaukee to chew on right there, because if you can pay a guy significantly more than everyone else and he's not willing to take that, you've got a real problem.
Hey, thinking of things that didn't quite work out like they had planned, let's talk about Pat Connaughton and Milwaukee. So
who knows how it was planned? Like, what was the original intent?
Well, it seems like the original intent was a 2-year deal, the second year being a player option, totaling $2.9 million, starting at $2.9 million. And that's not where they ended up. And in fact, I'm going to go to this teachable moment first, and then we're going to take a look at the Connaughton deal and see if we can spot the problem. So I do want to talk about bird rights for a second. Now, it used to be that bird rights, and as you know, bird rights let you exceed the cap to re-sign your own players. It used to be that as long as they were your former player, means there was no tenure requirement. They just had to have been coming off of your team for the last season. You had full bird rights and can give them whatever amount that you wanted. And way back when, teams started abusing it. The big one is Phoenix. We seem to see a lot of stuff going on with Phoenix, Ryan, and Danny Manning, where they signed him to a 1-year deal for $1 million, and then bird rights in hand turned around and gave him a much bigger deal. And in fact, he had blown out his knee one of several times that season, and the Suns gave him a big deal anyways, which is not so uncommon now. It was much more uncommon back then. So the league made it so that bird rights ramp up over 3 years. And every year, you get more and more ability to re-sign, to give people a better salary. So after 1 year with a team, and it could even be a partial contract, just not only a 10-day contract. After 1 year, you can re-sign your own player to up to a 20% raise, or 20% of the minimum, whichever is greater. You can give them up to 4 years, 1 to 4 years. You can give them 5% raises. So that's okay, 20% raise. But after 2 years, now you're what's called an early bird free agent. After 2 years, you get to go up basically up to the mid-level. You can give them a 75% raise, or up to what's called the estimated average salary. So around the mid-level, whichever one of those is greater. Minimum 2, maximum 4 years on an early bird contract, 8% raises. So you get bigger raises. Then after 3 years, you can open the bank. Full bird rights, you can give the guy the maximum salary. You can go up to 5 years. You can get an additional year there. And raises, again, are 8%. So the more you go, the bigger rights you get. But Connaughton was an early bird and signed a 1-year contract with a player option. And if you look at this chart, you can kind of see the problem there with that. A player option is basically ignored in a case like this. It's considered like it's a 1-year contract. So Connaughton, for bird purposes, signed a 1-year deal, and early bird requires a 2-year contract. So that's the issue there. That's why they could not sign that contract that they had apparently agreed to, or at least were interested in. And the reason for that is because they don't want you just stepping up the basis year after year after year just to get to that 3 years. Make it, 1 year contract non-bird, a 1 year contract early bird, and then break the bank on full bird. So if you're going to do the second contract, the early bird, you got to commit to an extra year before you can break the bank. So that's why that starts at 2 years. The other thing you can do, if you really want to sign a 1 year contract, you can renounce early bird rights back down to non-bird, and you can sign them to a 1 year contract, but then you're limited to a 20% raise or to 20% over the minimum. All right, let's go ahead and go back. And so what they ended up signing was starting at $3.9 million. So that was an extra $1 million. I'm sorry, starting at $4.9 million and totaling $16 million. So one question is, well, couldn't they have signed him to that deal, the original deal with the mid-level exception? And the answer is yes, they can start at $2.9 million, give him a 2-year deal with a player option. But by then they'd already committed the mid-level, too much of the mid-level to DJ Austin. So that wasn't available. So my question is, why didn't they avail themselves of any other options? How did it get a 3-year contract, get an extra $1 million as a starting salary when they'd apparently already, assuming the reporting is right, had already agreed to a much lower salary when they had other options? They could have, like I said, they could have gotten rid of the player option, or they could have gone 3 years and not done the same starting salary. So what do you think happened there?
I think, well, we only know what's been reported, so we can't know. And unless you've spoken to the parties involved, reports are often correct. And if we're going to trust these reports, and they're probably correct, it sounds like they just messed up and missed that rule. It's an easy rule to miss on the early bird needing to be 2. Like my initial, when I was playing with the Lakers, they had Rondo's early bird, and I said, oh, they'll do a 1 year. And then I thought, okay, I caught it because this is my job, and I'm sure the Bucks have great people, so I'm sure that this is overblown. But you can always do the second year non-guaranteed. So there are ways around it. So if you want to give a guy a 1 year, you could do 2 years last year non-guaranteed. But that's not a favorable contract to the player. And if the player's in demand, he's not going to want that second year. If he wants a player option, he's not going to then turn that around and say, no, I'll take a non-guaranteed year, which is a team decision. So I can't speak and know what happened, but I can say it's the most likely thing is that they just missed it, or that it's a misreport. Doesn't sound like a misreport. It sounds like they missed it flat out.
Well, saving the mid-level just makes sense for a team like Milwaukee that needs all of the tools that it can have to build a roster. I mean, they likely don't get DJ Augustine if they don't have more of that mid-level money. So I think that kind of explains the one part of it, but the original thing that Eric just said, they could have made the second year non-guaranteed, but then that essentially becomes a de facto team option. So completely unfair to the player when you've already agreed to, a 1+1. So this just seems like, oops, we messed up. What do we do to easily fix this and not take away from our mid-level?
Well, there's an additional problem with a non-guaranteed, Dave, because let's say that you want to get out of that year. To get out of that non-guaranteed year, you need to waive them. You lose their rights. Whereas if it's a team option or a player option, the player opts out, the team opts out the player, you still have that player's rights. You can pay them whatever their rights are. If it's full bird at that point, you can give them a max salary. If it's non-guaranteed or partial guaranteed and you waive it, you're stuck. Now you don't have those rights anymore. And obviously they value the player. They're bringing him back, and they're just minding their future because as we mentioned, the Giannis question's a significant one. So before they overinvest, although obviously putting money into Jrue Holiday via trade, they're making these moves with, trying to get Giannis to see this is a right place for him. You would think that they wouldn't have made some of these moves had they, maybe they think that maybe they think maybe there's a positive sign from Giannis, and that's why they're making these moves, or maybe they're making these moves to try to get that sign. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know where the Bucks are on all
giving
this.
Giannis a sign.
Right, exactly.
But to me, it seems like they okay, if it was a mistake, it seems like they overcompensated for that mistake. And maybe, Ryan, you can fill us in on what might have happened here. Because, they went they eliminated the option. They went an additional year, added a third year and a higher salary. That seems like a lot to make up for a mistake.
Yeah, I think, Eric and Dave, Larry, you guys nailed it. I think both parties, and I should say the two parties, the team and the agent and agency, they missed it, as these guys said. So here's what I think happened, to the extent that Connaughton and his agent thought, maybe it was a fair contract. Maybe he was taking a little less, but he wanted to stay in Milwaukee. And so they said, okay, a lot of this, guys, as you know, is about managing expectations. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that Connaughton and his agent said, that's an okay deal. We're not, jumping up and down about it, but we'll take it. It's a fair, solid deal. And to the extent the team comes back and says, well, actually, we kind of screwed that deal up. We want you for longer. It helps us, we'll give you another year. But we also can get DJ Augustine if you do this. Well, Connaughton and his agent might have said, well, we think we're taking a market or even below market deal, in our opinion. Everybody has their different opinion. So in order to do that, we'll take the third year, but we need more money, in the first couple of years. So I think that's what happened. That's how these things go sometimes. It's ultimately, it's on the agency, it's on the team, but ultimately it's on the team. So if to the extent the team screwed up, because I imagine they're the one that went to Connaughton and his agent with the concept, neither party caught it. I think that's what they did to make it right, so to speak. Okay, Pat, we underpaid you a little bit, maybe on the 2-year deal. We're going to give you a little more. We're going to lock you in for 3 years. It gives you the guaranteed money, maybe takes you out of your prime, but it's fair. And we apologize. We're going to tack on another year at a higher dollar amount. I think that's the way it ultimately went down.
I mean, it's like we always say, Larry, it's a people business, right? It's relationship business. And you never know when you're going to have to deal with Pat Connaughton's agent again. And you may want Pat Connaughton to do something that he doesn't necessarily want to do. So, I think that meeting him on his terms helps the team quite a bit because they need him. They can't replace him.
Right. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, unless he's changed, I think he's with Jeff Schwartz of Excel. It's almost impossible to track agent, who's with what agent. But if he hasn't changed agents recently, he's with the same agent as Chris Middleton and some other key players. So yes, that's a big agency. It's not one you're going to screw around with.
And the only other point I'm going to make here is that Cba Mastery with Larry Kuhn covers this 2-year minimum for early bird very, very well. So some people should avail themselves of that. That's all I'm going to say. So we were talking about the Lakers a little bit earlier. Let's kind of move on to them because they're one team that did not rest on their laurels. They traded Danny Green for Dennis Schroeder, waived Quinn Cook. They signed Trez Harrell to the full mid-level exception on a 1+1, signed Wesley Matthews with the biannual, re-signed KCP, 3 years, $40 million, re-signed Markieff Morris, sent JaVale McGee to Cleveland for Jordan Bell and Alfonso McKinney. And then I just saw the press release just before the show. They did finally waive Jordan Bell. And all that maneuvering, they were able to sign Marc Gasol to a 2-year deal. In the meantime, they let Avery Bradley go. They let Rajon Rondo go. They let Dwight Howard go, even though there seemed to be some confusion about that in Dwight's head. But
I think it's got to be a social media intern.
Could very well be. Or
that's who I'd blame.
The parsimonious explanation is no, Dwight just got confused. But yeah, that said, so as a result, though, the Lakers are now hard capped, and that is one thing I want to talk about because that's a teachable moment here. So the hard cap, one of the things that they're trying to do is with the luxury tax and some other mechanisms is to prevent teams from overspending. So they're trying to provide a spending disincentive. Now, the luxury tax is the fundamental part of that, and that's been around a long time. You spend too much, you pay the tax. Used to be $1 for dollar. That wasn't enough of a penalty, so they started making it so that it started at $1.50. The rate went up, so you paid more per dollar every $5 million you were above the tax line. And they also added the repeater tax for people who just couldn't break the habit of being in the tax. And if that wasn't enough, they also made it so that you start losing some of these tools under the CBA if your team salary goes too high. There's an amount called the apron. So these things don't start right at the tax line. You have a little bit of margin above that, and then you get what's called the apron amount. So it's about $6-7 million above that. You start losing things. So there are two versions of the mid-level, the full one, or the what's called the taxpayer mid-level. If you're at or above the apron, then you get a smaller mid-level. If you're above the apron, or this would take you above the apron, you can only go 3 years and a much smaller starting salary than if you're at and stay below the apron. You get 4 years and a much higher starting salary. If you use the biannual exception, you are then you can only do that if you are a lower spending team. And the same thing with receiving a player. You can send them out all you want, but receiving a player in a sign and trade also is something that only can be done by lower spending teams. So like I said, if a team is over the apron, or this would take them over, these tools aren't available to them. But they didn't want to get to a situation where a team they use these things and then they spend money and get over. You can't have the best of both worlds. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So they made it so that if you use one of those tools, if you use the full mid-level, which means any mid-level amount that's higher than that taxpayer mid-level or higher than 5% raises, well, the full mid-level is 5% also, so never mind that. If you use the biannual exception, or if you receive a player in the sign and trade, you're committing to being one of those lower spending teams. And that commitment is called the hard cap. So that apron amount becomes the amount that you shall not cross for the remainder of that salary cap year. And once you've done one of those things, you can't go over the hard cap for any reason whatsoever. And if you look at Cba Mastery and some of the other things that we've done, we talk about all sorts of onerous things and what teams have to do in desperate situations when they're hard capped and they slam against it. So that's the basics on the hard cap. Let's talk a little bit though about some of these rules, some of these moves that the Lakers were making, because with dealing with the hard cap, they did get kind of pretty creative. They spent the full mid-level on Trez, they spent the biannual on Wes Matthews, so they needed to create some flexibility. They ended up trading JaVale McGee. He was at $4.2 million, getting McKinney back at 1.8, getting Bell back. He was also at 1.8. And if I remember right, he was non-guaranteed, but it will trigger up to a full guarantee if he's still on the roster. So by waiving him, they're getting out from that $1 million. And it's like trading 4.2 for 1.8. So that created some flexibility. They were able to sign Marc Gasol for 2 years, $5.3 million. There wasn't an option on there, was either, was
no. I'll break that down, Larry. I got a lot on this one here.
I like Eric's theory, by the way, on the Gasol contract.
Exactly. Let me break it down for you, Dave. So, okay. So first of all, if you want to really look at the Lakers, for a couple of hours, I did a stream the other day. It's on my Twitter feed. I'm at Eric Pincus, EricPincus. It's right at the top. And I break down reverse engineering how I think it went. In retrospect, it's pretty darn close. The KCP number is slightly different because we were reverse engineering, but there's a couple things. So to bring up Dave's point, I think what's happening with Marc Gasol, Gasol got, I was told, about an $8 million offer to stay with Toronto. And he signed with the Lakers for what is basically 2.6 if it was 1 year. And so they gave him the second year, which obviously makes it more, right? Well, my opinion is, and this is just a theory, is that he's going to do what Tim Duncan did and what Manu Ginobili did. This is a 1 year deal, and he will probably retire from the NBA, go on to play, if he wants to, in Spain or wherever else he wants to go beyond NBA life, and they will pay him out that money, probably stretch it against their cap over 3 years. And it's a way of, can we go back to the circumvention slides, Larry? It's not legal if you agree to that ahead of time. However, as Ryan had said so eloquently, if you're going to do it, don't let anyone find out. Me speculating on it is not finding out. This is just speculation. I'm probably right, though, because not that I'm right a lot. If you ask my wife, I'm right sometimes, but mostly not. But I think I'm right here. But regardless of what they did, the Lakers had a choice. Could they find the right player to add to this team at about $5.7 million and keep the whole crew together? Or can they get a player at that 9.3 money that was worth going through all these hoops? And the answer was Montrezl Harrell. Yes. And then maybe they could have gotten Wesley Matthews to come a little bit cheaper. But once they were going this path, they had 3.6 for him. But to get out of the hard cap, they had to trade JaVale McGee. And as Larry mentioned, they had to choose. You have to match salary when you trade out a player, but it has to be guaranteed salary. And both Alfonso McKinney and Jordan Bell were non-guaranteed. And so the Lakers had a choice, and they chose McKinney. So they fully guaranteed McKinney, and they guaranteed about just under $600,000 of Jordan Bell. But apparently they waived him. They didn't want him. So my expectation is they'll stretch that money out at about $200,000 over 3 years. And it's all these little nickel and diming things. But there is another complicating factor, is that Dennis Schroeder has incentives. In fact, one of them just kicked in. He won't get the money, but his cap number changed because he has an incentive that says he'll get a certain amount of money if his team goes to the finals and if they win a title. So I think his cap number rose by $500,000 because that is now likely because the Lakers did those things. But he has another $1 million of incentives. So you have to count those incentives, to Larry's point, that no matter what, you cannot go over this hard cap. So going into the season, we don't know if the incentives are going to happen, but the chance that they might is enough to make sure that you count every single dollar and cent. So those incentives. So instead of counting Schroeder at 15.5, we had to count him, I think it was at 17 or 17.5. And ultimately, they made it work by nickel and diming and making little moves. And it looks like they have room for another 2, 3, maybe 4 minimum players. They could have given Markieff a little bit of a raise. They were able to convince him not to take a raise and to come back at a low price. I mean, I got to give credit to their GM, LeBron James. I mean, their GM, Rob Pelinka.
Hey, I'm going to move this along because you may be shocked to hear that the four of us like to talk. Let's talk about the Heat a little bit. So, and this one's more of a strategic discussion than a role discussion. So, we've seen more than one team doing moves because they're not looking at this year. They're looking at 2021, and they're looking at the free agents that are going to be in the market in 2021. Ryan, you brought up a great example. It looks like Van Vliet, you said, is going to be re-signing with a dip in his contract next year just to create a little bit of an extra margin.
Yeah, Eric and Dave, this is more your wheelhouse than mine. But I was told Fred VanVleet's contract goes down 8%. Keep in mind, as all your CBA Mastery viewers and listeners know at this point, listening to the three of you who know the cap much better than I do, the maximum raise. We talked about the full bird right contracts. The maximum raise is 8%. That's usually how it's used. But the contract can also go down the same amount. It can't go down more than 8%. So to the extent that VanVleet had a dollar amount in his head that he and his agent were comfortable with, I think it's what, Eric, 4 years, 85. Was that right, or in the right ballpark?
I haven't gotten his contract yet, so I don't. Okay. It's just come through. Wait,
did they report an option on that last year?
I haven't seen it come through yet. So
okay, because I thinking about this 8% dip makes me wonder if he got an option that he might not have gotten otherwise, because he is kind of taking one for the team here to open up more of that cap space in 2021. Of course, it may all be moot by Friday.
Sure. Yeah. If Giannis, I mean, obviously, they're looking at Giannis. And they signed a bunch of people with team options, right? So Iguodala got a team option. Bradley got a team option. Myers Leonard, Dragic. I mean, they're set up so that they could just decline team options and then go into it with some free agency money to spend. Except they just gave Bam Adebayo an extension, which means his extension amount's going to count against the cap, not his free agent cap hold. So now they'd have to get creative if they are going to try to sign Giannis next year. Probably we're looking at, okay, let's opt into these guys and use them as trade fodder and try to send people to Milwaukee in a sign and trade deal.
Well, but the Bam contract is a great example of the other end of what we saw with Pat Connaughton, where they went to the full max and he didn't take an option on the last year, right? So he gave up, it gave the team an extra year of control to get that full max money. I mean, he has an opportunity, I think, doesn't he have an opportunity to make the 195 over 5 if Yeah. So it can work both ways. And this is where you see, you know, the relationship part of the business actually coming in.
Yeah, but also for me, like the interesting thing is balancing those needs, so short-term versus long-term needs. I think you put it, you know, the micro versus the macro, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, again, everyone's thinking about 2021, but starting pretty soon, teams are going to start thinking about 2022. You know, like who are the big free agents for the year after Giannis? I don't even know yet. I mean, we'll know, I'm assuming by Christmas, because we'll see the Photoshops with the Lakers jerseys. But, you know, all of these teams, all of the smart teams like Miami, Toronto, you know, Denver, I think has done a really good job of managing their cap and keeping their young guys, you know, on affordable deals. The Lakers, they're all now thinking 2, 3, 4 years ahead of time, especially when you have guys, you know, this was the Anthony Davis, Giannis Antetokounmpo summer, well, off season. And it's a little bit anticlimactic, but there, you know, some of these teams are just looking to roll it ahead.
The biggest free agents we've ever had in November.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, Larry, before you jump, the Thunder announced that they acquired a trade exception for Danilo Gallinari. So they actually did that deal as a sign and trade. Instead of Gallinari signing with Atlanta, it is a sign and trade. So we talked briefly about how they want to start 5 trade exceptions. They
might be able to do that.
They are definitely on their way.
Excellent. Hey, something happened just recently that I want to talk about because it's rare, right? So, and we'll just cover this one really quickly but I don't want to pass up an opportunity to talk about Steven Adams, because this was the rare extend and trade. We hear about sign and trade all the time, but extend and trade doesn't really happen I can think of, this is the third to my knowledge, right? The other ones being Carmelo Anthony and Kevin Garnett. Is this the third extended trade ever?
There's only 3 I know of.
We did it first day. I was there, the Boston front office. I think Garnett was the first, if that's what we thought at the time, and we take credit for it, even if it's not true.
Well, and this is a teachable moment. I can actually teach something topical that almost never happens in the CBA. So an extend and trade, I call it a cousin to the sign and trade, because it's the same concept. You're signing a guy for the purpose of extending him somewhere else. Sign and trade is you do it with a free agent. Extend and trade, you're doing it with a guy that's already under contract, but you're extending. So there are limits to an extend and trade, where with a regular extension, you can go to 5 total years on the contract. With an extension, you always include the seasons that remain on the existing contract. So you can get to 3 seasons in total. You can only go up 5% from the last season of the current contract to the first season of the extension, and give 5% raises in later seasons. Again, those rules are lower than a standard extension that's not an extend and trade. So you think about clever teams going, all right, well, we'll extend you, and then in a separate transaction, we'll trade you. Or we'll trade you, and then the other team will just extend you as soon as you get there. Well, the league kind of thought of that. And they didn't want to take this away completely, because, okay, you could legitimately decide later on you want to extend them. Or you could sign a guy to an extension and legitimately a good trade opportunity can come up. But they at least made it a little bit harder. They put a moratorium in place. So if you sign an extension that's above the limits of an extend and trade, so more than 3 seasons total or higher raises than an extend and trade allows, you can't trade the guy for 6 months. Or if you trade the guy, again, above the extend and trade limits, they can't if you just trade the guy, that team can't sign him to an extension above the extend and trade limits for 6 months. So that's how they kind of make that work and balance okay, it could legitimately happen versus we don't want to game the system to make that happen.
Yeah, Larry, I'll jump in and say there was one more. Andre Iguodala last trade deadline was sent to Miami, and as part of that deal, ended up with an extension.
Yep.
It is rare though.
I completely forgot about that. All right, so that's kind of the meat of what I wanted to talk about here, and we're almost running kind of on pace to where I wanted to be with this one, which is kind of shocking for me. And because we did so good, I want to give everybody a treat. I want to bring on another friend of ours, Calida Taylor.
Yeah.
Sports Business Classroom alum. She has been a student. She has worked with us, and she's also the winner of GM School on NBA TV. So you've been sitting in the waiting room talking, listening to us talk about the stuff. What struck you so far about free agency?
Well, of course, the speed of all the transactions was totally crazy. But one thing that I noticed as I was going through my cap sheets and kind of looking at each team now that the deals are kind of slowing down is this is the first offseason in a long time where there was no franchise centerpiece who was on the move via free agency or trade or available in the draft. So the last few summers, it's been Kawhi. It's been, the Anthony Davis trade. You've got Zion at the top of the draft, Luka. So the teams seem to be falling in a couple of buckets as far as their movement. I mean, one bucket is, teams that are looking to improve their playoff roster around their top two players. So like the Lakers got the top two in place. Now let's supplement the 3 through 8. I think Phoenix did a great job with that, adding CP3 and Jay Crowder and re-signing Saric. So those moves really stood out as far as the strategy behind them. Then you've got teams like the Thunder who were clearly looking toward the future and just kind of stocking up their stockpile of picks and trade exceptions. So it's been really interesting to see how they're moving to improve the future of their roster as well. So it's been a crazy offseason. I've been digging into a couple like the Hayward signing trade scenarios I think are kind of interesting. And so just trying to keep up with all the player movement.
So if you're Sam Presti and you basically own all the draft picks at this point, so what are you trying to do here? Are you trying to, basically the more picks you make, the greater your chances of success, or are you trying to consolidate?
Yeah, so what's interesting with the Thunder is, they're going to be in a position that Boston was in for many years, where any disgruntled star that's available for the next 5 years, the Thunder are in a position to put their name in the hat, to overwhelm the team with draft picks or, with draft compensation. And if they make the picks and they do well developing them, they'll have young players, young stars to pair. So they seem like they're going to be in a really good position to potentially acquire that next franchise centerpiece via trade with all those assets. So I think they're going to end up consolidating. They definitely can't sign them all.
Yeah, they can grease the skids on any deal that they want to make, though, which is a nice thing to have. I remember when Mark Cuban bought the Mavs, and the first several deals he made over the first couple of years, he just kind of, the maximum cash you can throw into a deal was $3 million per transaction at the time, and he would just throw in $3 million to every transaction. It's like here you go. It's like coupons.
I made a joke the other day about Sam Presti, and we were all picking on Sam for not being able to keep these stars in Oklahoma City. And in like 7 or 8 years, we're going to be making fun of the 8 draft picks he gets for Cade Cunningham, because he is almost definitely going to get him in next year's draft. They're going to be so loaded. The next few drafts are just packed with franchise cornerstone talent. And so taking more bites of the apple when you are a place like Oklahoma City, like, let's be honest, you're not in these free agency meetings. You're not going to, Giannis is not meeting with the Oklahoma City Thunder if he goes to free agency. And so this is how you can win, or at least be good and competitive for as long as they were. I mean, I think Oklahoma City, that's one of the best franchises of the last decade with the way that they've succeeded. And even last year, when everyone counted them out, they still put together a team that was able to compete and make the playoffs. And, Sam Presti has shown he's kind of a genius at running a small market team. And the way you do it is exactly what he did. And now he owns every draft for the next 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember them telling me about like how they pitch free agents, right? And one of the parts of that is, okay, the big fish in a small pond type of scenario, right? You can come to Oklahoma City, you can be the center of everything in a market that absolutely loves this team and get ravenous support here. And
you can open a steakhouse.
Yeah, and they're looking for the kind of player to whom an argument like that is an attractive argument. So they're definitely able to attract talent, and part of that is built by doing things like they're doing right now. Who else do you think helped themselves the most?
I think the Pelicans did a good job getting 2 unprotected first. They're a little bit down the line. But I thought that was a great pickup because, as we've seen before, when you got that kind of transcendent number 1 draft pick coming in, your own draft picks become the value lessens. Your team gets good. You're picking at the end of the first round. So now, 4 or 5 years down the line, they've got some, and especially if Giannis doesn't end up staying in Milwaukee, those picks could be really, really valuable.
Yeah. Ryan, who were you looking at?
Portland. I think the Trailblazers did a really good job. They kept their star backcourt intact with Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum. Yusuf Nurkic has been a revelation in a Blazers uniform. And they weren't big, splashy moves, but, getting Robert Covington, who, I get that it's a new front office or a new GM and new head coach in Houston, but to the extent that you want to keep your star players in James Harden and Russell Westbrook happy, in my opinion, you do that by trading clearly the better player in Covington for a worse player in Ariza at this point in their respective careers. I know, I get it. Houston got a couple draft picks, but I just like organizations that are consistent, Larry. And we were talking about OKC. They've been consistent. There's no secret what they're doing. They are flipping veteran players for draft picks. And as Eric mentioned, trade exceptions. They are loading up for the future. They're not going to win a championship this year. They're not going to try to win it this year or the next year, but maybe 3 to 5 years from now, they could hit something on the upswing, either with guys they draft. So I really like Portland. The trade for Covington, the trade for Cantor, who played the best basketball of his career there. Even a low-cost signing like Harry Giles, I thought was a good move. They also re-signed Carmelo. And then getting Derrick Jones Jr. in free agency. So I really like what they did overall. I think they have a chance to be, a top 4 team in the Western Conference. So they stood out to me at a high end because, again, they weren't splashy headline-grabbing moves, but when you look up and down the roster now, there's more talent and depth than they've had any time in the last 7 or 8 years, and they've been in the playoffs just about every year in the last 7 or 8.
I'm going to do something that we did in the last webinar, which is something that my wife likes to do around the dinner table, which is peak and pit. You give me your peak, the best thing that you thought happened, and your pit, the worst thing that you thought happened over this. Let's start with Calida.
I really like what Phoenix did. I'm excited to see Chris Paul with Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. And, I think that as far as the movement up the chain, I think that Phoenix can make the biggest jump potentially this year if everyone stays healthy. So that was one of my peaks. The pit, I really didn't understand what was going on in Detroit. A lot of money, a lot of attention given to the center position. So that's one that I'm kind of, wondering about. And, we'll see if they are able to turn anything, flip those assets to anything else. But yeah, Detroit, I wasn't really understanding what was going on.
Yeah. Ryan, I assume that Portland was your peak. What would your pit be?
Yeah, Portland was up there. The other thing that's neat for me, Larry, getting to know some of these young players in particular a little bit, scouting them and then the pre-draft process is seeing some of them realize their dreams. So the guys who got max extensions, Donovan Mitchell's a great dude in Salt Lake, happy for him. Bam Adebayo seems the same way in Miami. So that's always a peak when you see anybody get that kind of life-changing generational wealth, especially if you even have a passing relationship with them. That's a highlight because, it changes their lives and their families' lives. The pit for me, I think Calida hit on it. So with Detroit, with the team, to the extent that it seems like, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like they have waived or going to waive and stretch multiple players. Folks, you usually only do that from front office perspective if there's one superstar you're trying to get and that's the only move you can make to do it. You don't do it just to do it. Like I don't, I think the Pistons are a non-playoff team. Go ahead, Eric.
I agree with you. Except that those contracts, Dedmon and Magruder, have a second year that's non-guaranteed or partial guarantee so that you're able to stretch low money. The bigger, to your point, because you are absolutely right in your point, Charlotte has been reportedly deciding on stretching Batum. So yeah. I think your logic applies, but a little bit less to Detroit because those contracts are more favorable. But Batum at $9 million a year for 3 years, that's insane to me. But that's me. That's my pit right there, right? Right. I didn't mean to jump on you, Ryan, and take your pit and peak, but man, I had to step in there.
I think the Larry, if I could just, like the pit for me is you only do that usually to win at a high level. I don't think any of us in this call think Detroit and Charlotte are going to win at a high level this year to the extent they do that. Another pit for me, Larry, and this is, not to get too personal, too sentimental, but look at the free agent list. There are a lot of good players. There are a lot of good names. Eric and Dave and Larry and Calida know as well as anybody. There aren't many roster spots left. So this happens every year. It seems more severe this year with less money in free agency, that a lot of veteran players, a lot of guys who've had long, successful successful careers and maybe made a lot of money. There's not going to be opportunity for them. And to the extent that with COVID and all that, teams may limit even who they bring into training camp. I think you're going to see more players than ever not have a roster spot. Guys who came into free agency thought they'd get, full guaranteed contracts, may not have a home. When the musical chairs carousel stops, they may be out of a job and scratching their head, kind of wondering what happened. So that's always challenging when guys realize that this may be the end and they don't have a roster spot next year.
And to piggyback on that, the other thing is that the schedule is off. They're already playing. Right. They're playing in China. And so these veterans that aren't going to find a roster spot, they don't have options necessarily overseas. And also the visa process now is even more complicated because of COVID. So, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. There have been very few guys coming over from Europe, Facundo Campazzo being one of them, but not a lot of guys. Whereas I thought the last few years, you've had some of these younger front offices be really, really smart about snagging guys a little bit early from Europe. I talk about Brad Wanamaker a lot. I thought he should have been in the league 2 years before Boston signed him. Well, Guduric last year was signed by Memphis. I thought he was probably a year or two early. And now I think we're going to see it swing back the other way for a couple of years until people get their thing, their whole house in order. Not a lot of Euro scouts, not a lot of scouting being done in general, because we're not even going to have college games. Everyone talked about this draft and not having enough information. It's the next draft that's the real issue, because the college season right now is looking very much in doubt. The NCAA has not gotten its act together. Rick Pitino is kind of the only guy, prominent guy in college basketball saying, hey, we should be pushing everything back so we can have a full season and do right by these players. And so there are so many things that we haven't even thought of that are going to raise their head as a problem. So I think that you're way ahead of most people in the media right now in thinking about the roster crunch. And I feel like in January, we're all going to say, that guy doesn't have a job. How is that possible? And it's just being priced out, right?
And depending on what happens with COVID, some could open up, but that's, there's a lot that depends on that.
Yeah. Right now the G League is, there's a lot of stuff happening with the G League that it's up in the air. We don't know if we're going to have a season. That's a lot of jobs, and not just players. I know that at least one G League team has let go its coaching staff because they're just not going to have them this year.
Wow. Yeah, well, around this time, in a normal year, there are usually roster spots that are filled up with young players on partial or non-guaranteed contracts, and the teams make decisions somewhere around January on who they're going to keep and are they a playoff team. And if they're not a playoff team, they'll stick with young players or maybe get rid of those and get other young players. But the teams that are playoff bound might cut those young guys and go after these kind of vets that we're normally talking about. However, this year is such a mess. There are teams that are starting to get into, like the Lakers with a hard cap, where they may not be able to just cut a guy and add another guy. So it's a weird year. I'm grateful that we're where we are, and I hope we can get through this healthy and the season is able to complete. I'll take what we have, but it's an uncomfortable situation. I know that everyone I talk to in GMs, agents are frazzled and overworked and underslept. But it's going to be great. It's going to be fun. We're going to make it work. And some people are going to be out of jobs, but it's a short-term problem. They'll find home somewhere.
All right, Eric, you gave your pit. What's your peak?
I could say one, Aaron Baines to the Raptors, and I'll leave it at that. I'm without explanation.
I gotcha. And Dave, did you give a peak?
I think peak. I'll instead of saying Phoenix and Portland, because I do think that they had a great week, I'm going to say Philadelphia. A little bit under the radar, and we always say they have great pieces. They just don't fit. And now they have a basketball team. They actually have guards. They have wings. They have lineup options that allow them to play Ben Simmons at center and still have a ton of shooting. And Joel Embiid, they got him a backup. I think Philadelphia may have done more to improve its actual shot at the finals than any other team in the league. I mean, Portland, they're nice. And I think they're going to have a really good regular season. I don't know if they have enough to get to the finals. I look at Philadelphia and I look at some of the issues that Milwaukee has and Miami has and Boston has Boston's wing depth right now is a sneaky soft spot. Losing Gordon Hayward's bigger for Boston than it looks on paper. I think Philadelphia has really bumped themselves up into the conversation for coming out of the East.
They needed shooters.
The pit, I mean, the Danny Green treatment, I'll just go there. Getting traded from LA and all of a sudden Lakers fans forget he's a good player. That just bothers me personally. But if I'm going to pick out one contract, it's one of the ones that Detroit signed. It's Jeremy Grant. And it's not for Detroit though, because they got a good young player on a fine contract. It's for Denver. Losing Jeremy Grant knocks Denver out of finals contention, I think. They got to find a way to bolster the wing. They got to have a guy who can guard LeBron and who can also put pressure on LeBron when he's being guarded by him. Jeremy Grant had a coming out party in the playoffs. To lose him, that's the biggest loss any team suffered all of free agency.
Interesting,
yeah.
Interesting take.
And I think, my pit is, I'm kind of with Calida on this one. Told you she's bring her on and then she is perfect and I look bad. But yeah, I just don't get what Detroit's doing. And, they have Troy Weaver there as a new GM. He was the number 2 in Oklahoma City to Sam Presti before this. And he was more of a talent evaluator than really like on the CBA technical side. And it just kind of seems like this is more of a learning period for him than anything else, because I don't quite understand what he was doing. And then I got to go back kind of to the Lakers for one of the peaks, because it's rare to see a championship team come off of a championship and then make some big adjustments that really help the team. I think they really help themselves. And I really like the way that Rob Pelinka went to work on this team.
I think that they identified the areas where they needed improvement and where they needed depth. Playmaking, obviously, they go out and get Schroeder, Trez Harrell, because they needed some scoring to take the load off of LeBron and Anthony Davis during the regular season. My one pushback, I love that they brought back KCP. He was too important to lose. Wes Matthews is not a one-for-one replacement for Danny Green, but in his defensive role, he can give you 75% of that, I think. Will he shoot enough? He's a record scratch guy. Will he shoot enough to take advantage and create the space that LeBron and Schroeder and Trez and Anthony Davis need? Danny Green, he's a lot of things. He may be an inconsistent shooter, but he's going to shoot 38 to 42%, and he's going to shoot 6 to 7 times a game. And can Wes Matthews do that without hesitation? That's going to be big for them.
And it probably means more shots for Kyle Kuzma down the road too, good or bad.
I'm sure he won't mind that. I like Kuz. I think Kuz is a pretty good player. He's been miscast so far in his career, being on that really bad team as a rookie and just, being more of a grown man than the rest of those guys set the expectations for him, I think, a little bit unfairly. It doesn't help that, it's also playing for the Lakers.
Yeah. And it was hard to get shots last year.
Yeah. But he's a good player. He was good for them in the playoffs. I mean, you don't close games with a guy that you don't believe in. And LeBron James definitely doesn't. So, I mean, I think that he's a big piece for them this year. He's more like their 7th guy, but that's perfect for him. He has no conscience. He will always let it fly. And his defense is underrated. And people are going to give him a hard time because he can't guard 4s. He can't guard 5s. He's a wing. He's done a really good job. He's better at hook and trail. I mean, he's just turned into a really solid player. So I think
the analysis.
Fine with Kuz. Yeah,
all right. I was gonna say that they are relying on paper on Kuzma being an important wing defender. And if you watch him guard Michael Porter Jr., you would say he's not a good defender. But if you watched what he did against Kawhi and Paul George in stretches, and what he did against Houston, what he did against Portland, he did Vogel's bidding. And that's all you're asking. And is he perfect? No, there are some technical things in his technique as far as how he plays defense, how he moves his feet, that are good and bad. And but they are definitely relying on him, maybe more so now with the loss of Danny Green as a defensive wing. So if he can step into that role, he could have a long-term future on this team as a scorer/defender. And I know some people might be listening to that and saying, no, this is crazy. He's not a defender. But if he can find that role, and that's the challenge, young teams that start with a bunch of lottery, all they get lottery, they don't ever really learn sometimes how to play defense. I think last year was a course in how to play defense, if you watched what the Lakers did. And I think it's great for his career. It's what Brandon Ingram has blossomed, and certainly due his money. he didn't get that same education on the defensive end that Kuzma got last year. And we'll see what that means for his future, but he's getting paid plenty, so he'll be fine. And I'm happy for Brandon.
Hey, I want to move on to questions in just a second, but real fast. And I really do want to keep it fast. The one team we haven't mentioned that I did want to get opinions on was the Clippers. I mean, they're on the court. Their biggest switch might be, Ibaka in with Montrezl Harrell out, even though it wasn't the same transaction. But probably the bigger move for the team was Doc Rivers out and Tyronn Lue in. Well, how do you think they did this offseason? What do you see them doing next year?
Well, I'll jump in because
I was like, I don't want to dominate this conversation, but I certainly have opinions on coaching.
I'll say that Lue is an unproven commodity because when you coach LeBron James, just like when you're Phil Jackson and you coach Kobe and Jordan and Shaq, people will say, oh, it was those players. So there's at least a question to say, we need to know who Tyronn Lue is as a coach outside of the shadow of LeBron, and we're going to get a chance to see that. There's a very talented team. I think they're weak at playmaking. They're weak up front because they lost most of their bigs. Ibaka will help. I view him as a little bit older. He was someone who was very reliant on his athleticism to perform. I'm curious to see how will he be able to solve that. He's not going to be someone who's going to guard Jokic for extended periods. He doesn't have the body necessarily to do it. Marc Gasol on the Lakers is certainly older, but he's closer to maybe an Arvydas Sabonis guarding Shaq, where you just can't push through the body, right? It's big bodies banging. Whereas I don't know if Ibaka has that body. So I still think the Clippers are missing a piece or two to make this work. They need playmaking and they need more size up front.
Ibaka gives them a credible floor spacing rim protector, which JaMychal Green was not. So playing JaMychal Green as your small ball five, you have to have someone there. And usually I think they were using Paul George a lot last year as that backline helper. Well, now you got Ibaka. So you can actually put Paul George out on the wing. You can put him in space. You could put him on the team's best, big wing if you really want to. They also could play too big because Ibaka can stretch the floor. You can have Zubac in there, who is a fantastic rim protector. And so when you play larger teams like the Lakers, you can go too big because Ibaka is able to stretch the floor. He can move with Anthony Davis to a degree where you're not worried about him just dying anytime Anthony Davis puts the ball on the court. I think it gives them just more lineup options. But I agree, they didn't add the most important piece that they were missing, and that's a playmaking guard. They don't have an offensive identity. Last year, it was all isolation, and it was funky. It threw teams' defenses off. They didn't know what to do. But this year, they've got to come in with one. And one of the nice things I'll say about Ty Lue is that you'll never catch him not adjusting. And to a certain degree, I've seen him over-adjust. But he is always going to look to make the adjustments. I mean, one of the nice things about a coach that coached in that many finals, we got a lot of tape on him. And I have tape of him without LeBron James on the court. So I know what it looks like when you don't have LeBron. He's got Paul George. He's got Kawhi Leonard. Ty Lue's a really good coach. I think we're going to see a better version of last year's Clippers.
Interesting.
All right. Well, I do want to move on to some questions, but first I do want to talk about Cba Mastery because I got a special offer for everybody. So if you're on this webinar, you're interested in the business of basketball, and if you are interested in taking that farther, if you have a goal to work in the league, if you want to be in a front office, if you want to be an agent, if you want to be a media person who's savvy on the CBA, if you want to be a better armchair GM, or like I was many years ago, just a better understanding of how the league works. I've been teaching the CBA for a long time. I documented it with the FAQ 20 years ago now. Gosh. And for the last 5 years or so, I've been teaching it at Sports Business Classroom and immersing students in it. I teach it directly to teams. I've taken my curriculum and we've made an on-demand video course out of it, Cba Mastery with Larry Kuhn. There are 23 videos, 11 and a half hours of video content. There are quizzes to reinforce your learning. There are exercises to make you go out and do research into stuff and answer questions. You get references, into the CBA, key terms, transcripts of all the videos. There's a final exam, and we have the ability for you to ask questions. So it's all available on demand. You can take it at your own pace. with CBA Mastery. It's been going great so far. We've been getting great feedback on the course. So if you go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com, you can click on the CBA Mastery link to sign up. And you know what we're going to do here. Because you're here watching this webinar, we are going to make you an offer. Now, just so you know, we've decided that, okay, Black Friday, Cyber Monday coming up, we are going to make a public offer of 10% off the course up through Cyber Monday. But because you're here, you guys, you're our peeps, you get a special 72 offer hour, meaning this is our Black Friday offer for you. We're going to up that discount to 15%. And we also throw in for you guys, the access to the videos from Sports Business Classroom, the seminar that we did this past year when we did it online rather than being in person in Vegas. So if you use our promo code, you're going to get access to all that and the 15% discount. Now, there are two different promo codes because we also offer payments on this. You can pay all at once, or you can make 3 payments. If you're paying all at once, use the promo code BF15. BF15. If you are going to use the payment plan, use BF15PP. Our host makes us use different codes depending on what you're doing. So use one of those codes. You're going to get 15% off whether you use the payment plan or pay all at once. You get inclusion in our exclusive emails promoting jobs within the industry. We are setting up a discount for Sports Business Classroom 2021. We don't have the finances figured out for that yet, so the amount of that discount remains to be determined. But if you are admitted to the program, you will get a discount to the program by virtue of having purchased CBA Mastery. You also get access to the VSL Talent website. Think of that like LinkedIn, but for basketball. So teams, networks, other companies that are working around this industry, they use the VSL Talent website to find talent. So if you're interested in working in or around the league, you want to be on VSL Talent. I can't stress how important that is and how useful it is to people. You get access to our SBC 2020 virtual conference videos, 60 hours right there of on-demand video content. We cover everything from how to do the job finding stuff, building a resume the right way, interviewing, how to network, how to do an elevator pitch with people you might have only a few seconds of access to. All the speakers and teachers who've been associated with Sports Business Classroom, in addition to me and Eric and Ryan has worked with us, Nate Duncan, Bo Estes. We have plenty of great guests. We've had just this past year, Mike D'Antoni, Kirk Goldsberry, Neil O'Shea, the GM of the Portland Trailblazers, Gillian Zucker, who is the president of the LA Clippers, Tommy Shepard, the GM in Washington, Mark Jones from ESPN, many, many more. I mean, just the videos from our virtual conference alone are a tremendous value. We're throwing that in for you with CBA Mastery. So once again, go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com, click on CBA Mastery to sign up for it. Use the code BF15 if you're paying in full, or the promo code BF15PP if you're making payments. All right, so let's take a couple of questions. One piece of advice for people who are gonna ask questions in the future. We got a lot of questions. One piece of advice, keep it short, because honestly, with the number of questions we have, I'm gonna stick to the shorter ones. And we have a ton, so I'm just gonna take a couple of here. Eric, here's just a process question for this year. If Sacramento does match, now the typical date to trade a player you just signed is December 15th. What date is that this year?
Let's see. I think I have that. I better. February the 6th is the date that you can trade a player. Oops, my dog's barking. It's a mess this year trying to figure out dates. I have these memorized every year, but yeah, February the 6th is the Bogdanovich. But can you hear my dog?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm going to probably mute and let you go on to the next question.
All right. Another procedural question. If you sign and trade for, say, the Pacers with Malcolm Brogdon, how long are they hard capped for? The entire length of the 4-year deal? That's a great question. There's Eric's dog. No, if you are hard capped, you are only hard capped for the remainder of that salary cap year. So it doesn't matter how long the contract's for.
And something I wanted to mention about the hard cap, if you want a great example of how hard that hard cap can really screw teams, go look at the roster churn that the Warriors had to go through last season just to make it through the season. And they didn't even finish the year. I mean, how many roster spots did they wind up going through? It was 20 or more, right? They went through a ton of
it was a ton.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Here's a kind of commentary question. Well, let me do one more process question. So now the first year of AD's new contract is constrained by the apron, right? So yes, the Lakers are now hard capped. And like I said, you can't exceed the hard cap for any reason. I don't care what your excuse is. The answer is no. So if they did leave enough room to re-sign Anthony Davis at the maximum, but if they didn't, if they signed somebody else in the meantime, well, then guess what? They can only go up to the maximum, even if it's for Anthony Davis.
They've accounted for that clearly. They know how much they're going to pay Anthony Davis. They're not going to be hard capped and get paid.
Yeah, I assume that was the centerpiece of their strategic planning, is what they're going to do. So here's a speculation question. Will the Rockets trade James Harden or Russell Westbrook, or do they trade both?
Larry, I'll give my opinion on this one.
Yeah.
I think if they are going to trade one or both guys, especially if it's both guys, they needed to trade Westbrook first and then trade Harden. Because I bring it up because if you're one of the other teams and they trade Harden first, especially if it's for young players, draft picks, something like that, then if you're one of the other teams, you smell blood in the water, say, well, now they have to trade Westbrook. He doesn't want to be there, especially again, if it's young players and draft picks coming back. So if you're making, it's unusual obviously to trade multiple star players in the same offseason or maybe in the same season. We'll see if and when Houston moves. But if they do it, I would look for, if they're smart, Westbrook first and then potentially Harden, because the other way around, they crushes their leverage and the other teams really make, bad offers, assuming that Houston has to trade Westbrook because he won't be happy there without Harden.
I hate to say this because Russell Westbrook has been such an entertaining player. You're really not, you don't have a lot of options. Let's put it that way. Maybe you can trade him for John Wall, but John Wall hasn't played competitive basketball in 23 months. And who knows what he's going to look like when he gets on the court. And his contract might be worse than Russell Westbrook's. So you don't have
dollars to value.
Yeah. The Knicks seemed like they might've been an option. Obviously Charlotte did, but they signed Hayward. I mean, I don't know what exactly you're going to do. I'm sure they would love to trade him. They probably would have loved to trade him right after they traded for him. But that contract's not exactly easy to move.
As they were making the trade, done.
Right.
Oh,
yeah. Ooh, crap. Oops. I mean, the thing is, he's still a decent player. I think he's better at raising your floor than he is at raising your ceiling. So if you're a team like Charlotte, I actually would rather have Russell Westbrook than Gordon Hayward, because you're going to come in and he's going to at least give you a shot at the playoffs. Gordon Hayward, good player, but he's not going to raise that floor the same way. Now, Russ also can shoot you in the foot. So, it's
going to move the needle one direction or the other.
Yeah, it's at least going to be entertaining. I mean, I would say put butts in the seats, but nobody's putting any butts in the seats.
Right. It's got to put cardboard cutouts in the seats.
And as far as Harden goes, I just don't see why they would trade him unless they got, blown over by an offer. Just doesn't make any sense. You got him under contract. He's not going to, leave the paycheck behind. He's going to play. So I think roll it out there, try to win.
Unless you do a Sam Presti, we're not going to compete. So let's try and get 45 draft picks and 15 trade exceptions out of them.
That's
the
not
only team they could.
I was just going to say that's not a great option for them though, Larry, because as you guys know, they owe all those picks and pick swaps to OKC over the next 6 years. So no, serious to the extent that as an executive, that's insurance. They're kind of flying without a net, so to speak, without the insurance. Those picks are, lightly protected, but theoretically they could have the worst or one of the worst records in the league, be in the lottery and then not get their pick. That's a disaster as an executive. That's how you get fired.
Maybe this is the makings of a deal. You send them to OKC in order to get it all back.
Give your stuff back.
Just give me my crap back.
OKC says no, thank you.
I'll throw out that Steph Curry, I believe, is the highest paid player this year, but the next three are Wall, Harden, and Westbrook, not in order, but those three are the next highest paid guys. So trading that kind of salary mid-season is very difficult. There are issues about 15. You can't go over 15 roster spots in a trade in season. You can go up to 20 off season. There are teams with cap room off season that might be able to help facilitate. Certainly the Thunder could be a broker in whatever happens with those players, using their trade exceptions to take on players to try to help a deal happen. I think Larry or someone might have mentioned that earlier, that they could be using those trade exceptions as leverage, as assets. But we're
going to get tired of hearing about Oklahoma City being the third team in trades for the next 2 years.
They can facilitate, lubricate any deal because of all the picks and exceptions, and they'll end up getting more picks and whatever they do. But those contracts are going to be very hard to move. It's going to be an interesting test because this is a league where stars have tremendous power. And we saw how difficult the Pelicans had it last year, where Anthony Davis wanted to be out. It was uncomfortable, where they were sort of forced to play him when they didn't want to play him. The league basically said, you got to play him. And I felt for Alvin Gentry trying to manage a team, trying to win games, trying to save his job when you've got to deal with that. Do the Rockets want that kind of problem, or is Harden going to, is he going to play ball with them, or is he going to be adamant? And then you've got another temperamental superstar. These are not bad guys. These are great, great individuals off the court and have done great things for their communities. But it's a very difficult situation if they're disgruntled and don't want to be there. And if they can't get a deal before the season, and once you get to that 50-man roster spot, you got to trade for the biggest contracts in the league. It's not an easy thing to do.
That's true. All right, we're running behind. Go figure. So we have a lot of questions, but I'm going to have to cut it off there. So that's it. Once again, remember, go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com, click on Cba Mastery to sign up for Cba Mastery with Larry Kuhn. Use code BF15 if you're paying at once, BF15PP. You need to do this by the end of the day, Friday, to take advantage of our Black Friday offer. This webinar was brought to you by Sports Business Classroom and Hall Pass Media. Our thanks to everybody at Hall Pass for helping to put this on for us. And on behalf of everybody here, Calida, Ryan, Dave, Eric, and myself, thanks for watching.
Is this like the news where we're just, they can see us but can't hear us, or can they hear us?
I can hear you.
I don't know. We should just have some banter anyways, just to, because we don't have theme music playing at the end, so we can just talk for everybody else.
Dave's risking making a mortal enemy talking about my dog like that.
Oh,
first of all,
I trust but verify. My dogs are not in the room.
First of all, you named your dog Palinka.
Oh, damn.
I'm sorry. Wait, hold on a second.
Ouch. No, it's Bailey. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, now, so
glad that was clarified.
That's insanity.
I have a dog named Pippin because he's got long arms and doesn't always come when I call him.
No, Sam did tell me that more than one person told him in OKC, "Oh, I named my dog Presty."
That's a level of fandom that I do not relate to.
Listen, I got obviously a lot of friends. I'm not rooting for any front offices. I'm rooting for front offices to put together good teams for people to root for. That's what I like.
No, I have no rooting interest. The one who, the one that wants to hire me, that's the one I'm rooting for. Absolutely.
It's a good strategy, Eric. It works well.
I'm with you.
All right, but the next dog you got to name Palinka.
Oh, I like Rob, but no. Rob's fine. Anyway,
Sam Amick's reporting that Sacramento's unlikely to match. They're still deliberating, but they may not match, according to Amick.
Don't like.
No. Not a fan.
Like, make that Luke Walton's problem for a few months. Deal with it for a few months.
Well,
then make a move.
Now we have an audience, so I'm not going to say what I was going to say. But
all right. Well,
I'll text you.
Max is saying he wants us off so he can set up the recording. So
all right.
I will see you all. Thank you once again.
Good to see all of your faces.
Calida, goodbye.
Yeah, Calida, always wonderful to have you. We're gonna have you on. Like, we'll send like Eric off, and we'll have you on for the whole show because just completely makes this a better program.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. One final thought. The most savage move from a front office perspective would be if Sacramento leaked that, waited till 11:59, and then matched it after everybody went to bed. Said, screw you, Atlanta. We'll make them think right down it. We're going to lead them down the track. They think they're going to get the player and then pull out the rug at the last minute. I'll have a laugh if that happens. I'll probably be in bed, so I'll find out when I wake up tomorrow morning.
And then later on, trade him to Milwaukee.
Oh, my God. All right, guys. Have a good night.
Right.
Take care.
Yes, thanks again.
Happy holidays.
You too.